Today we are back at it again, and I'm going to be running a complete restoration on this pair of 2011 black cement Jordan 3s. I sold these to a good buddy of mine a couple years back, and since then he has worn them into the ground. Although he's not too concerned about getting the tabs replaced, he did want to make sure that they looked halfway decent and were in completely wearable condition again. So for this pair, I'll be doing a total reglue, and I'll also be repainting the midsole after giving these things a nice deep clean. This pair of kicks has definitely seen better days. The paint is chipping pretty significantly on these things, and there is a significant amount of sole separation going on. They are totally thrashed right now, so I definitely have my work cut out for me. The first thing that I gotta do to get these things into wearable condition is make sure that I separate the midsoles from the uppers and the outsoles from the midsoles. I start my separation process by removing the thread at the toe cap that holds together the uppers and the soles. For this part of the process, I use a weeding tool and a razor blade. I then pull out my bone folder, and utilizing light pressure from my bone folder and my hands, I start to pry the uppers away from the midsoles. I try to be as gentle as I can during this process so I don't damage any of my components along the way. After I've successfully removed my uppers from my midsoles, I start to remove the outsoles from the midsoles, and this was really easy because of the age of the kicks and how old and dry the glue was. Now that I have the soles separated from the uppers, it's time to get rid of all of the old paint off of the midsoles so I have a nice clean surface to work. What I'll be doing is utilizing this clay molding tool to try and scrape off all of the old paint from the midsoles. Luckily for this kind of paint, this type of removal process actually works out quite well. You just have to be careful as to not exert too much pressure because you could potentially damage the midsoles. The soles have officially been separated on this pair of black cement 3s, and the original paint has been stripped from the midsoles. We still have a long way to go on this pair, but the next step is to get all of my surfaces prepped, so then that way I can get these things glued back together. I start my preparation for my reglue by removing all of the old factory glue with a Dremel tool. I try to pull all of the glue into one section so I'm able to pull it off in one big glob in a nice clean fashion. I then move from the outsoles to the midsoles, where I utilize a very similar technique but have to be a lot more careful due to the material and the age of these midsoles. After clearing off the midsoles, I move over to my uppers, where I start to use a sanding bit on my Dremel tool to remove the old glue. I should probably skive first, but for this project I went directly to the Dremel tool with the sanding bit on it, and that seemed to do the trick pretty well. After using my Dremel, I move on to some cotton balls and acetone to remove any old debris, dirt, grime, and remaining glue that might be on the outsoles, the midsoles, and the uppers. For the midsoles and the uppers, I'm especially careful to utilize minimal acetone, so then that way I don't damage any of my components. Luckily, I was able to remove most of the glue utilizing the Dremel, and very minimal acetone had to be utilized on both the midsoles and the uppers. I've officially completed all of the prep work. Now I gotta get the outsoles reglued to the midsoles, and then the midsoles reglued to the upper. I begin my reglue by applying 2 light, even coats of Barge Super Stick to both the outsole and the midsole. After ensuring that everything is evenly coated, I wait for 2 hours for the cement to cure completely. After 2 hours, I reactivate the Barge Super Stick utilizing heat from my heat gun, and then I bond section by section. For this pair, I started off at the toe, followed that up with the heel, and I found that both the medial and the lateral edges fell directly into place, and I was able to get a wonderful alignment and apply great pressure for a strong bond. For the upper to midsole bond, I follow nearly the same exact process. The one distinct difference is that for the uppers, I actually utilize a different brush that has a finer tip, so I'll be able to get all of my glue lines nice and crisp. After 2 hours of letting the glue cure, I like to start my bond at the toe cap at one of the corners
so I'm able to get the best alignment possible. I then hit section by section different parts of the shoe to ensure a nice strong bond and a nice even alignment all the way through. After applying the appropriate amount of pressure to the footbed and making sure that I have a strong bond, I am all done with my reglue.
Getting these black cement 3s all reglued together was definitely quite a process. It took me a really long time to clean off all the old excess glue because on the left shoe, somebody had utilized super glue before to try and get these things sticking back together. Due to that, the preparation work took an extra long time, but there is a little bit of a malalignment at the heels. It's only something that you'd be able to notice if you took an insanely close look, but I was able to get the glue job looking pretty solid. Next up, I gotta give these things a nice deep clean, and then I'm gonna have to get my midsoles repainted on.
Once I had these shoes re-glued together, it was time to give them a nice deep clean. Utilizing a magic eraser and a Dremel Versa, I was able to successfully clean the soles, and then with a soft bristle brush, I was able to clean the uppers without damaging them. Once the shoes had dried, it was time to get them prepped for the repaint. I did this by taping off both the outsole and the uppers with some masking tape to make sure that everything was going to be completely covered, and that way no excess paint would be able to damage or stain any of the other parts of the shoe. After prepping the uppers and the outsoles, it was time to start my repaint. I started off by hand painting the white quadrants first because I found that that helped to fill in some of the pores that had been created during the factory paint removal. I followed that up with some paint from my airbrush to get some nice even coats and a nice full-bodied look. I then prepped to hand paint all of my black paint onto the upper quadrants of the midsole, and I ended up doing all of the black paint by hand because I found that I was able to get a nice deep and full finish without having to even pull out my airbrush. This probably also saved me a little bit of time and cleanup on the airbrush. I then removed all of the tape that I had guarding off of the black quadrants so I could apply some matte forecoat from Angelus in order to finish off these midsoles. I like to apply this finisher because it gives a layer of protection while also giving a nice factory looking finish. I then removed all of the masking tape and paper towels that I had blocking off the uppers and the outsoles to reveal what my nearly final product looked like. I realized that I had to stitch up the toe cap still, so I unlaced the kicks, brought out my sewing awl, and got to stitching. This part of the process was definitely time consuming, but in order to get that nice crisp finished look on the shoe, it's definitely really important. My client also decided that he didn't want any sort of back tab replacement, but I did feel the need to paint the Jumpman and the Air logo on the back to make sure that they had at least a nice clean look to them. Once I had finished up the stitching and the painting, it was time to get these kicks all laced up and call it a day.
I have finally finished the restoration process on these black cement 3s, and I gotta say, they are looking crazy good at this point in time. While restoring this pair was definitely a challenging process, the results speak for themselves. Let's take a closer look. For this restoration process, I had to do a complete re-glue, a midsole repaint, a deep clean, a repaint of what's remaining of the back tabs, and re-stitch the toe cap. I'm especially happy with my re-glue on this project, especially considering that originally this pair of kicks had been touched up using some super glue. Trying to navigate around that became exceptionally difficult. I was able to get some very clean lines on this pair, and I have a nice strong bond. The repaint definitely came out really nicely as well. While there was a little bit of damage during the factory paint removal, I was able to cover up most of the pores and fill them in. These uppers have definitely been revitalized with the deep clean, and even though my client didn't want fresh back tabs, I went ahead and painted the old back tabs so that the Jumpman has a nice full coat of paint. And these kicks are looking a lot better than when they first came into me, and definitely have a few more years of wear left in them. If you guys learned anything during this restoration process, please leave it in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts were on this restoration process. To everybody that stuck around till the cold, bitter end of this video, I really appreciate your support. You guys already know, I'm Sailboat, and I'm out of here.